Roland was a warrior from the land of the midnight sun, with a Thompson gun for hire, fighting to be done. The deal was made in Denmark.
All right, welcome to the History in Music podcast. This is your host, Scott Gifford. History in Music, where we listen to, discuss, and pick apart songs that have cool historic context. I'm joined here with Sean Oborn, who has graced us with his presence and chosen an excellent song that I had not been aware of until now. So, welcome, Sean. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing well. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So, Sean is new to the podcast, so a very warm welcome. I mean, the podcast is like maybe 2 episodes old, so it's not like he's not much newer than I am. But yeah, we're here because we love music and we love history. But Sean, let's get into a little bit about who you are, so the audience knows. Yeah, who is Sean Oborn?
Who am I? Why am I here?
Yeah.
So yeah, like you said, I'm Sean. I'm a fan of history and of music, so this is a perfect, fit for me to do something like this with you, and I appreciate the opportunity. So I am originally from California, but I currently live in Utah, and I have as far as my taste in music, most people say my taste in music is terrible. I like all different kinds of music, but everybody says that. If I'm really to be truly honest, for most of my life, pop punk and the sort of the emo screamo movement of the late 90s, early 2000s was kind of my jam. That's when I was in high school.
That's what endeared you to me. So Sean and I met on Twitter, and we're a part of this group chat where we all submit different songs. And Sean and I feel like we're vibing pretty good with the songs we were submitting. So
yeah,
definitely
shout out to Bob the Duck.
Yep.
for getting us together.
Yeah, exactly. It's been awesome.
Yeah. So, but as far as my interest in history goes, I've always kind of had an interest in history, and I actually went to college at BYU Hawaii, and while I was there, I didn't really know what I wanted to study, and I sort of kind of just fell into history, and it's been a pretty natural fit because I like random, fun, pointless facts about things, and I like studying about people and the man's inhumanity to man and the extremes of the human experience and all that. So I do have a bachelor's degree in history, but that does not qualify me to be a historian. It just makes me a history enjoyer. So that's
nice.
Why I'm here.
Yeah, likewise. Well, not likewise necessarily. I haven't majored in it. I'm just interested in it and enjoy it. We mentioned we have a similar taste in music, not necessarily just historical music like we're talking about here, but I had mentioned to Sean that I was starting this podcast and I was kind of slow in getting it going, and he's been really pushing me. So thank you, Sean. And he's kind of a perfect fit for the podcast, being that loves music. I mean, not only has what I would say a really good taste in music, but he's well versed in lots of in music, popular music and stuff. So, and then when I learned you're a history major, I was like, all right, perfect. We got to get you on the podcast, and you might want to get used to his voice because he'll probably continue to be on as long as he wants to. So, yeah.
As long as you'll have me.
So you talked about your taste in music. What's your interest in history? Like you have maybe a broad like undergraduate degree in history, but what's your interest?
So as far as like specifically in history, so it's interesting because I get that question a lot, because most of the time when you major in history, get a bachelor's in history, there's usually some sort of a focus, not always, but there's usually some sort of a focus, like, oh, I'm expert in, the Western Europe from this time period to this time period, or, medieval Korean history or something like that. And as you move up in your, college experience to get a master's degree, PhD, whatever, usually you get more and more specific until you become the expert in something no one's ever heard of. Like, I'm actually an expert on 16th century French pikes. they used
Yeah.
during the 100 Years' War. It's like,
Yeah,
really? There's a guy for that?
That's usually the meme. It's usually someone working at a coffee shop explaining it to somebody, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And what I found is it's kind of like the law of diminishing returns. Like the more you get yourself educated in history, the less money you make.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your levels of autism also go up, consequently from that. So, but yeah, so because I didn't actually have a focus in history, it was literally just a history degree. And I have a minor in political science as well, which is unrelated. But because I graduated from BYU Hawaii, our history program there was extremely small. I was one of, I think, 8 other students graduating, including myself and my wife.
Wow.
So yeah, it was pretty small. So it's cool because you get to know your professors a lot, and you can have a pretty good relationship with like your classmates, your professors, and so forth. But because of that, there's not really they don't have a huge history program where you can take these classes that are in some sort of specificity. And so my degree is just general, but because of where I attended, it sort of lent itself to sort of specializing in Asian history and Pacific Islands, just because that's what BYU Hawaii, for those that don't know, is a college founded by our church actually in the mid 50s as Church College of Hawaii. And then in the 70s, it became BYU Hawaii. And so it's sort of a sister institution to the one in Provo, but it's meant to be, it's sort of its clientele, if you will, is supposed to be for the Pacific Islands and sort of Asian co-prosperity sphere.
Nice.
So yeah, so because of that, I would have professors there who, like, one of my professors was like the world's leading expert on like modern China. And there's another guy there who is quite literally the world's leading expert on medieval Korea. Like, he had served his mission there, so he spoke Korean. He married a Korean girl, and the guy just knew everything about medieval Korea. And so people would like seek him out to talk about medieval Korea. And so, but I mean, if you don't care about medieval Korea, it's kind of boring, you know what I mean? But that dude loved it. So that's my point in saying all this, is a lot of the classes I took were, international relations of Asia, modern China, things like that.
Got it.
History of surfing. I took a history of surfing class.
Oh, wow.
So, but as far as what I actually enjoy is I enjoy the history of my people, Western Europeans,
Yeah.
Kind of I would say all ages and time periods. And I usually go through every year or two, I kind of have a different, flavor of what I'm kind of going through at the time. So lately I've been getting really into the Great War, World War I, kind of close to the turn of the century, and actually also getting into just some other conflicts around that time. But
nice.
Anyway, sorry, I don't want to ramble too long.
No, that's fine. It's a podcast. That's what we do. Yeah, we're kind of a firm anti-credentialism here, but it's nice to have someone with some credentials. Because all mine are, my credentials consist of a hardcore history podcast. And
yeah, that's actually my credentials too. I may have learned more from that than from actual college, but
that dude is amazing. Like,
yeah,
I don't get how he can sit there for 5 hours and just like talk.
Yeah, or let alone people listen to it.
Yeah, seriously, it's engaging.
Although I learned Dan Carlin, the guy that does hardcore history, all he has is a bachelor's degree in history. But that's why he always says, he's like, hey, I'm not a historian at all. I am not qualified to weigh in on these things or make an opinion. I can just tell you what happened, to my understanding. It's kind of what I do, I guess.
Yep, that's awesome. So shift a little bit. Let's the song that you heard in that brought us into the episode was, I guess, co-written. You said co-written by Warren Zevon. We'll get into his other co-writer in a bit, but it is called Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner, which you'll probably guess or intuit from the name of the episode. But it's a really cool song, and from the sounds of it, it's from a historical period and place that maybe you haven't done a whole lot of research prior to this. I definitely haven't, so it's been really cool to dive in. But I'll kind of lean on you a little bit to deep dive into some of these lyrics. But first, before we get into the lyrics, can you give us a little bit of a the historical context for the song?
Yeah. So, and I guess just to let you know, like we were mentioning this earlier when we were talking, I am not super familiar with Warren Zevon or this song. I like the song Werewolves of London. I play it a lot because my wife hates it. And I think it's kind of a cool song. And this song, Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner, is from the same album. It's from his album Excitable Boy, which is like I think it's like his third or fourth album or something. It's not even his first album, but this song is from the same album as Werewolves in London. So, but I think it's more or less kind of a deep track from that album. I don't think it's one that ever played on the radio or anything, but it's from the late 70s. And the only reason I heard it is, I was listening to Spotify, and every once in a while Spotify will kind of throw some rando songs into your playlist there. And this one came on and I said, hey, Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner. This one sounds kind of bass, to be honest with you. So that's kind of what made me perk up and listen to it.
On Spotify, I'm looking at the play numbers. Werewolves of London has 92 million. This one has 8 million. And then there's even another one, Lawyers, Guns, and Money, which has 28 million. So it's definitely not. Like you said, it's a kind of a deep track.
Yeah,
which I wouldn't have guessed, because it's like a catchy song. It's good.
Yeah, it's pretty good. And I actually didn't know that it was pulling those kind of numbers. I mean, I bet half of those are probably like Rhodesians that are still around, and then they probably about 1 million of them are me listening to it. So,
well, yeah, we're gonna boost those numbers.
We're gonna boost the numbers after this episode, man. All the listeners be bumping this song.
Yeah.
But yeah, so as far as like the historical context of the song, like I said, written in the late 70s, but the song is talking about something that was, I think, fairly well known in world history from the 60s, the early to mid 60s and kind of the late 60s as well. A lot of issues going on in Africa. There's the Congo crisis, and you have Darfur and all these other things that people used to talk about back in the hippie days. And so that's kind of what our context or our time frame is for this song. Is it's about this guy that basically volunteers. He's a European, and he volunteers to go fight in the quote unquote the Congo War, which was fought in the late 60s. The song says 66 to 67, but I think it had been going on for a little bit before and a little bit after that. But that's sort of like the time period we're talking about, is basically the late 60s, and you have a European mercenary fighting in Africa for basically a country that no longer exists.
Mm-hmm.
He says he goes down to Biafra. And I mean, high fives to anyone knows where Biafra is or when it existed.
Yeah, I definitely had to Google that. It existed from 67 to 70, apparently. So
yeah, there you go. Don't blink or you'll miss it.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think very few are even aware, like you said, of this whole the Congo crisis. I think it's known that there's lots of goings on in Africa, lots of wars and warlords and whatnot. But from a kind of a Western point of view, American point of view, we don't know much about the specifics. At least I don't. I didn't learn it. So apparently, yeah, these Europeans and probably Americans, I don't know much, were being recruited and paid as mercenaries to come fight for. Was it any side basically, or is it just like one side pulling in these Europeans?
I think it was primarily one side that was pulling the Europeans. So because you had, and Africa's a mess. It's just there's always always something going on there, some rebellion or civil war or genocide going on. But in this particular case, there was the Republic of the Congo, and they were fighting these like rebels, if you want to call them that, tribesmen. Katanga is what they called themselves. Or
in the song it says the Bantu.
The Bantu is an actual tribe, I believe, of in Africa, and so they had kind of risen up, because the context of the song is that this is the decolonialization of Africa. So for hundreds of years, you have all these various European countries, the primary ones being England, France, Belgium, Italy to some extent, Germany to a very small extent, but they colonized Africa, as we all know, and now during the 50s, 60s, and up until the 70s, they're sort of pulling out of Africa and kind of turning power over to local African leaders, democratically elected presidents, what have you.
Yeah. And but that leaves a power vacuum, right?
It leads a power vacuum, exactly right. And so what you end up having is basically civil wars on civil wars on civil wars, and that will just last forever. And so what's happening now is this Republic of the Congo, which I believe was formerly a Belgian colony, and you basically just have different people just trying to sort of vying for power. And so what you'd have is these mercenaries, a lot of them were Dutch or Belgians, going to basically just trying to make some good money and go fight and kill some tribesmen, basically.
And they were generally pretty badass, right? Like, they're you don't want to mess with them.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
If you're going to Africa to fight someone else's war just for money, or just because, like, you've got to kind of have a screw loose a little bit.
Yeah, or you just love doing what you do. I mean, I think there's a certain breed of dude that is just bred and built for combat, for war. And I'm not talking about like just physically imposing kind of guys, but something in their mind, they just have that warrior spirit, if you will. And so they quite literally seek out a conflict like this. And you see this a lot, and this isn't new. You know, mercenaries have been around for literally, the Greeks had mercenaries, right? You have Greek mercenaries going to volunteer to fight for the Egyptians, against the Egyptians. You know, you'd have all kinds of mercenaries all over the place. So I think it's just a certain kind of guy.
And I understand I guess the historical context for mercenaries, but in like a modern world, even into the 60s, it's not something that an everyday person does, right? Or that you talk about or know about. And so, and you're right. Certain people are just wired that way, and we all know people like that just love conflict, especially physical conflict. These people kind of had an outlet, right, with being able to ship down to Africa.
Yeah.
And so,
well, I think one of the undertones, a lot of this too, is, and this happened. I mean, this is just a function of the Cold War, which is what we're in right now, right in the 60s, is whenever there was some conflict anywhere, you'd have the big powers kind of on the sidelines or you know, on the DL, basically assisting one side or the other. So in the Congo crisis, for example, it's the Congo versus, you know, the Katanga or the Bantu or whoever, but the Congo was supported by who? United States, Belgium, you know, like the UN, you know, things like that. And then you'd have like the Katanga rebels who are supported by who? The Soviet Union, Cuba, China. So it was always a communism versus
it's a proxy war, right?
Yeah, exactly. A proxy war. And so that's what you'd have a lot of times. And I think that's kind of what I enjoy about learning about these mercenaries so much, is there's not a lot of them going to fight for communism. They're all going to fight for, you know, the other side, you know, which is sort of inspiring. I'm sure there were, you know, Soviet, you know, guys that were inserted into Africa and fought for them, but we don't really hear too much about, you know, Cuban mercenaries fighting in Africa. I'm sure they existed, but maybe nobody cares. I don't know. But most of them are fighting for the side that's against communism. And that's what's interesting when you read these guys' accounts, these guys that were mercenaries that volunteered to fight, almost without exception. They're not really there because they care about the local conflict. They're there because either one, they believe in what they're doing and they just basically hate communists. They want to kill communists, or the dudes just love shooting people.
Yeah, they just love the headshot.
And so I think, and I think for guys like that, not being in a war or not fighting is just, they don't know what to do with themselves, you know?
Yeah, totally. So speaking of these mercenaries, who is Roland?
So Roland, as I understand it, is not a real person. He's made up, and the song says that he's from the land of the midnight sun, and then later on it says he's Norwegian. So he's a Norwegian guy, and the song indicates that he made a deal in Denmark on a dark and stormy night to go, you know, fight to help out the Congolese, the people of Congo. And so he goes over there with his Thompson gun to basically, you know, help out the Congolese and fight these people. But what I learned from studying a little bit more about this song is Warren Zevon is an American guy. He I don't think he ever served combat anywhere. I mean, maybe during Vietnam, maybe. But he apparently in the early 70s in Spain, he went to a bar called the Dubliner, and in Spain, and he met this guy there named David Lindell, or it might be Lindell, but David Lindell. And apparently this David Lindell guy was running the bar, the Dubliner, and he had just gotten back from a brief foray into mercenary work in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess that sort of inspired Warren Zevon to write a song about him. And so they both collaborated on the song. So he's actually considered the co-writer of this song, even though I don't think he's written anything else as far as I know. And he's not actually a musician, I don't think.
So he just contributed basically some context and yeah, who knows what he contributed. But that's really fun. It makes this song kind of come alive more so than like. So kind of a little more history on this podcast itself is we started out as kind of a Sabaton podcast where we'd review Sabaton songs, and theirs are more high level, maybe not really telling a story. This one kind of makes the history come alive a little more, where it's a fictional character, so that's fine, but it tells a top level story of this Roland guy, but then underneath that it's telling actual history, and so it slips history into a really fun song, which I think is cool. It kind of fits the ethos of the podcast, where we want to make history accessible.
Well, and kind of what I like about that is the fact that, I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, like Sabaton, for example, every song they write is some epic about some super cool historical thing, right? Person, event, whatever, battle. And in this case, Warren Zevon, I was just reviewing now, he has no combat experience at all. He's never been in any kind of military capacity at all, as far as we know. But because he had collaborated on this song with someone who had, it sort of lends a little more credence to the song and can sort of almost speak from experience.
Yeah.
You know, totally. which always adds a little bit more, I don't know if I want to say gravity to the song, but, you know, it makes it a little more legit.
I think so. And and what makes it even more interesting is that the story of this Roland character is that he so like kind of to run down the story is he's the best Thompson gunner. He's really good, and he has a partner named Van Owen who fights by his side. And then the CIA decide that Roland is too good, or so good that they want him, or they want him dead, right?
Yeah. Which is
wanted him dead.
Which is an interesting line, because that's in the third verse, right? Because the song basically kind of starts with, you know, he makes this deal in a dark and stormy night, goes out to Biafra, this country no longer exists, to join this bloody fray, and they're knee deep in gore. They bring the Bantu to their knees. He's the best Thompson gunner ever, and it's him and Van Owen, all these other guys. It says they're killing to earn their living and to help out the Congolese. So, but the first thing they list there is what? Money, right? Which is oftentimes kind of the draw for all these mercenary types. But it's interesting because you're right. In verse 3, it says, well, Roland's the best Thompson gunner. And because of that fact, the CIA wants to kill him, which
he's like too dangerous for,
which is really funny, because I don't think he poses a threat necessarily to the CIA, because remember, in this conflict he's supposedly fighting in, the US is on the same side.
Right.
So it's interesting why the CIA would want to kill him. But then again, if you follow, you know, modern events and the whole Epstein everything,
exactly.
You know, this is written in 1977 is when he wrote this song.
Yeah, that's what, like you said earlier, it's kind of a base song. Like that, it's getting into some stuff that, like, there's a lot to read into. Like that, it's the CIA that basically killed him, which is the next line, which says the son of a bitch Van Owen blew off Roland's head. So the CIA hired his buddy Van Owen to kill him. And again, like you said earlier, they're there for the money, and so Van Owen's like, all right, you pay me some money to shoot somebody. I'm doing that anyway. I'll turn to the side and shoot my buddy. But so there's a lot to read into why he chose the CIA in this fictional story to be the bad guy, you know?
Yeah. Because, I mean, it's almost like a foreshadowing, right?
Yeah. I mean, there was some distrust of the CIA didn't start yesterday, right? It's been around for a while. So Roland dies, but that's not the end of Roland's story. His head is blown off, and the name of the song is "The Headless Thompson Gunner." So
Right.
now
And just
he's
a
kind
little
of a
aside.
specter, right?
Yeah, exactly. He's a ghost. But there's a side note there. The chorus of the song is Roland the Thompson Gunner, just repeated for the first 3 verses. In the third verse, when his head gets blown off, the chorus then becomes Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner.
Oh yeah, very nice. That's nice.
Yeah. So yeah, it's funny. So he does become kind of this specter, this ghost. In fact, the song actually says that time stands still for Roland until he evens the score. And there's actually, because that part, if you go back and listen to the song, this is the chorus after the third verse. It says Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner, and there's a part where it's singing almost like singing in a round or like a melody, excuse me, a medley. And so what you'll have is like the main guy, Warren Zevon, singing the main line, but there's people in the background singing a different line of the song at the same time. So it's a little bit hard to hear what they're saying in the background. But what they're actually saying is Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner, time for another peaceful war, which is again interesting, right? Because that's an oxymoron, a peaceful war. But yeah, well, anyway, Norway's bravest son, time stands still till he evens up the score. And you can still see his headless body stalking through the night.
So he's haunting Van Owen, which you would assume, but he blew Van Owen's body from there to Johannesburg. So
yes,
he's obviously interacting with a physical person as a ghost,
right? Because it says that he's you can still see the muzzle flash of his Thompson gun. He's stalking through the night. It says he searched the continent for the man who done him in. And he says he found him in Mombasa. Mombasa is a city in, I believe, Kenya. And so it makes me believe that Van Owen is still doing mercenary work just somewhere else in Africa now. And so he's finished the job. He's just, having it. Yeah, exactly. So he's in Mombasa drinking some gin in a bar room. And it says that basically Roland walked in, aimed his as a ghost now, a headless ghost, headless horseman, if you will. Walks in, aims his gun at Van Owen, doesn't say a word, and blows Van Owen's body from Mombasa all the way to Johannesburg, which is in South Africa, like several countries away.
Right. So yeah. So he's obviously kind of maybe the don't want to get too much into like the intent of the song. We've talked about it a little bit, but I would think that it seems like he's trying to build a legend, right? He's trying to build something and make like almost a myth of this guy. It's too bad this song didn't like catch on like he maybe thought it might, but because of just these outlandish things, but set in real world context, it's just what it seems like to me.
Yeah, well, and it is interesting because as we continue on, the fifth and final verse, he's kind of getting at the fact that Roland's not actually a real person; he's more like an idea, right? And he's kind of sort of, you're right.
Not
the Spartacus thing, but it's like we're all Roland,
yeah, like because after that chorus that you mentioned, where it changes to Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner, he repeats that a couple times. Then in the next verse, it kind of alludes to it. He becomes less of a actual person and more of an idea, like you said. The lyrics are the eternal Thompson Gunner, still wandering through the night. Now it's 10 years later, but he still keeps up the fight. In Ireland, in Lebanon, in Palestine, and Berkeley, Patty Hearst heard the burst of Roland's Thompson gun and bought it. So it's like he's almost become a force for what he stood for, which is pretty cool. It's like whatever force, the force is like doing his work, or he's doing his work through this force throughout the world. And I'm sure there's some significance to those 4 places. I don't know if you have any insight into those.
Yeah, well, because if you think about it, again, the time period for the song, right? So the song is supposed to be 66 and 67 is when this conflict happens, and now it says that Roland he's the eternal Thompson Gunner. He's still wandering through the night. Now it's 10 years later. And so that would mean that it's now 76 and 77, which is the exact time frame that he's writing the song that we're actually listening to. He wrote it in 77.
Right.
Then it says he's keeping up the fight in Ireland, in Lebanon, in Palestine. Anyone who's paid attention to anything in history in the past 50 years knows of all the conflicts going on, especially in Lebanon and Palestine, right? Middle East.
Oh, yeah.
Middle East being the Middle East. Ireland is, I mean, in the that's I believe that coincides with when they had the quote unquote the troubles in Ireland, and the U2 song Sunday Bloody Sunday.
Yeah,
I think
I
it's
assume that
referring
was
to that.
80s, but it's probably more 70s than 80s.
Yeah, but I mean, I
but
think it's happened several times.
probably.
But it's almost like these not that people are using necessarily Thompson gunners, but you have these people that either fight for money or they have some sort of ideals that they're fighting for.
Well, they're fighting for the good guy, not necessarily for their country, but for their cause.
I think you're right, but it's interesting because Ireland, okay, cool. Yeah, the Irish want their independence, trying to get the redcoats out. Cool, I can buy that. Lebanon and Palestine, pretty much the same thing. Berkeley is interesting that he put that in there, because Berkeley, really California, UC Berkeley is there, and I'm from Northern California myself, and Berkeley's a terrible place. It's I mean that's where Green Day is from. Very liberal, and it's basically known for being just this liberal hotbed for just the far left, essentially.
Yeah, when I think of Berkeley, I think of colleges, riots on college campus, maybe, or maybe not riots, but like protests and stuff like that. And so that's where my mind went.
Yeah, and I think that's the exact idea. And so I don't know anything about Warren Zevon's politics. I mean, this is in the 70s. He lived through the Vietnam War, so maybe he's kind of a hippie guy where he's like, hey, man, they're just trying to fight for like their rights, man, or whatever. I don't know. But it's interesting because he says in Palestine and Berkeley, and then he says Patty Hearst heard the burst of Roland's Thompson gun and bought it. Now, I've never quite understood those last two lines there. But him saying the fight in Berkeley and then talking about Patty Hearst right after that, I think that might be related. So I'll just, do you know anything about Patty Hearst or who she is or what she did or anything?
No, I don't.
Okay. So Patty Hearst is the granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst.
Okay. I've heard of like the Hearst Castle and stuff like that.
Yeah. Hearst Castle. But William Randolph Hearst was a newspaper magnate. I think he was like a Civil War vet, if I'm not mistaken. And for those of you Newsies fans, I believe he's in Newsies as well. Yeah, so I think he became one of the richest men in the world. But yeah, he basically owned what became Hearst Communications, and is sort of considered the founder of what they call yellow journalism. I mean, some people argue that we had the Spanish-American War because of William Randolph Hearst.
Interesting.
Because like I forget what the line was, but he basically told the U.S. The government he can get them a war just by having control of the press, so to speak. So very wealthy guy. The Hearst family is a very wealthy family, and Patty Hearst was basically this guy's granddaughter. So she comes from a wealthy family, from I guess originally the East Coast, but I think he went to California later, but from wealthy family. And what eventually happened is there's this organization that I don't think even exists anymore, but it's called the Symbionese Liberation Army. And basically what it was a bunch of black dudes in the 70s that were fighting for basically just far left causes. Right. They would shoot up businesses, and they committed a couple of assassinations of people they felt were against their cause or whatever. But in the mid 70s, I think in 74, they actually kidnapped Patty Hearst.
Really?
And the entire idea was, oh, she's rich, we'll hold her for ransom. And I think the idea, if I'm not mistaken, is they wanted not only to hold her for ransom, but they wanted to get money and like foodstuffs from her family or bought by her family so they could like donate it to people in the inner city or something. So at the time they kidnapped her, some of the leaders of the Symbionese Liberation Army had already been in prison. They'd already been in shootouts with police. Some of them had been killed. They'd already killed like I think the superintendent of the Oakland school district, who was himself a black guy. They thought that he was in favor of school IDs, and so they basically went and assassinated him, and they literally shot him with hollow point bullets that were laced with cyanide.
Wow.
and
Dang.
It came out later that he actually wasn't in favor of anything they were against. They basically just killed him essentially by accident because they thought that he was against whatever their.
Okay, so they're pretty trigger happy.
They're sort of just like this sort of inflammatory group that went around doing things like that, sometimes without all the details. But so they kidnap Patty Hearst and they hold her for ransom. And I think at the time they were holding her for ransom for like a couple million. But the reason why this is even notable, and for those of you listening back home, ask any of your boomer parents or grandparents or anyone older than that. Everyone has heard of Patty Hearst and what happened to her. Almost everybody, because it was huge in the news back in the 70s and then kind of never again. But the reason why this is memorable is because after they kidnapped her and held her for ransom, all of a sudden they start robbing banks, this Symbionese army. And Patty Hearst has joined them and is basically robbing banks at gunpoint in like the Bay Area of California and like LA. Yeah. Because she was basically like, they say she was indoctrinated by them. And so supposedly she bought into their whole left-wing agenda and started
just complete Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it's basically one of those classic cases of Stockholm syndrome because she buys into their entire agenda. I think she sleeps around with a couple of the guys, like the main guys that were in this organization. And she's only 19 at the time, by the way. She's like a sophomore in college when they kidnap her. So yeah, so they end up like robbing some banks. And then she gets like captured back, essentially, has to go to prison for a bit. And she's eventually pardoned by Bill Clinton.
Wow.
She's still alive. She got remarried and still alive. And now no one even knows who Patty Hearst is or cares for that matter. But it's interesting that he put that in there.
Yeah, the fact that she's still alive. That is an interesting line.
Yeah, she's not that old. I'm looking right now. She's 68 years old. But I'm wondering if, part of the reason he probably included that is because all of that was happening 2 or 3 years after this song came out. Right. Or before the song came out, excuse me.
So it's probably while he was writing it.
Yeah, probably while he's writing it, it was on his mind. And so maybe he's thinking like, hey, man, she's just someone who's fighting for a cause, man. I don't know. But it's interesting.
She's obviously like he killed her, right?
No, she's still alive. So I think what he's saying here is
okay. What is he saying?
So because it says she heard the burst of his gun, and then bought the gun, or bought whatever he's selling.
Oh,
right.
I thought bought it was like she died,
like she got killed.
Yeah,
I guess. Yeah, maybe.
No, it obviously doesn't work. Well, yeah, maybe if you want to read into it that much, but interesting. I just assumed she died.
Yeah, and so she's still alive even today, like we were saying. And so I think what he's saying here is that it's that kind of solidifies the whole fact that this Roland guy isn't a real dude, but like what he fought for, his gun, if you will, like his reason for fighting or what he was trying to do or accomplish is legit, and you see it all over the world. Look, Patty Hearst, she heard this dude's gun and bought into it.
Maybe it's passing the torch to Patty Hearst.
Yeah. Terrible person, terrible organization to pass the torch to. But yeah, because shortly after this, I'm pretty sure like every member of the Symbionese Liberation Army went to jail. They're all out of jail now because it was like 40 years ago. Yeah, and again, I don't know anything about Warren Zevon. The cursory review I did is I learned that his mother was actually raised a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but I don't think she was active later in life, and he wasn't raised a member of the church. So again, other than that, I don't know anything about where he stood on politics or anything. He's an American. He's from Chicago, but he died in Los Angeles, and so maybe yeah.
Why'd you choose this song?
The reason I chose it is because, like I was talking about in the very beginning, sometimes I kind of go through different, I guess, I don't know, waves, if you want to call it that, where I'll be really into like some historical time period or a group of people or a conflict or something. And so lately I've been really studying a lot in post-colonialism in Africa. So basically the former colonial empires leaving Africa and sort of the aftermath, because you have all these interesting stories like this of white mercenaries going to fight in Africa, or you'll have a breakaway state, if you want to call it that, where they want to sort of maintain that that white minority in power, like you have in Rhodesia and to a lesser extent South Africa. And so it's a lot of interesting conflicts that oftentimes we either don't hear about, or if we do, it's just it's so shrouded in claims of racism and whatever else that you don't actually know what's going on. And there's some actual stories of really inspiring guys who, whether they enjoyed killing or not, they actually went out to go fight for a cause,
Right.
which in our day of relative peace, like not everyone can say that. Like, I don't know anyone that's, fighting in Ukraine right now, or, I mean, the last real war that we had would be like Vietnam. I mean, you can say the GWAT if you want, the global war on terror, but that's kind of hard to define because it's this 20-year period in several different countries fighting against several different enemies,
right, right.
And so, I mean, that definitely was a war. But as far as like, okay, we're fighting a war, it's called a war. It's not just a war on terror. It's the Vietnam War. And who are we fighting? Well, we're fighting these guys. They have their own outfits, and that's kind of sort of the old school style of fighting a war, if you will. I mean, the closest tie I have to that is my father-in-law, who's in his 70s now, and he served in the Air Force during Vietnam. But that sort of that type of guy is kind of slowly dying out.
Totally.
If that makes any sense at all.
Well, not only dying out, but it's actively being squashed or squelched. Yeah, thanks for picking this song. It's really cool, and you had a lot of really good insights. I felt like I just kind of sat back and listened to some cool stuff. So thanks for thanks for that.
It's my pleasure. And actually, there are quite a few. There's a lot of like history wave type YouTube videos out there. And so there are some pretty cool ones out there that show footage of different African conflicts involving mercenaries and European powers in the 60s and 70s, where they'll basically play this song over footage of the war. And actually there's this chick who I don't even know any other songs by her, and I actually forgot her name, but she actually did a cover of this song, Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner, and made it a little bit more kind of I don't want to say a hipster kind of song, but sort of. So it's sort of updated for the new generation, the new millennium, if you will.
Right.
And so I know there's at least one Congo wave or Rhodesia wave, whatever you want to call it, YouTube video out there where it basically plays her singing this song while showing guys actually fighting in the Congo. So it kind of makes it amps up the realism for sure. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and if you're listening, go search that and be warned. It's kind of graphic. There's some it's war footage. So it's really cool.
To quote one of my history professors in college, he would talk about how he had a couple kids. I think he had 3 kids, and he would show them like R-rated movies when they were like somewhat younger, like teenagers or a little bit younger. And some people don't care about that, but this is back in the mid 2000s. But he would show his kids like R-rated movies that had a historical context, and his reasoning for that, and the reason I brought up the story is because he would always say history is rated R. Sometimes it's more than rated R, but history is rated R. It's not rated PG or PG-13. It's definitely rated R. Dude. And that's being nice.
Yeah, and I mean, even the Bible and Book of Mormon and stuff like that, it's pretty brutal. Like I've been teaching in church. I've been teaching the 8 and 9-year-olds, and all throughout we're learning the Old Testament, and it's been like the funnest thing because I've just been telling them the story, just like as flat as possible, just telling them the stories that come out of the chapters and making them as gory as possible. And they've been loving it. It's awesome. Yeah. So I support your teacher or your professor in that. I don't think my kids necessarily are old enough, but I'll make that decision in a couple of years. But movies like maybe Patriot or something like that, where it's pretty gruesome, but it's history. It's what happened.
Yeah. Well, if you go back and watch those movies now, you're like, oh, that's actually kind of tame. What was everyone crazy about this, back in the early 2000s? But yeah. So but that's the whole thing is like, reading it is one thing. Sometimes seeing it can kind of trigger different things in the brain.
Right.
But yeah,
totally. It is different.
Yeah, history is definitely rated R. But one thing, I found this on Wikipedia, so don't tell any of my history professors this, but a fun fact from this song is actually 2 fun facts. One is apparently Warren Zevon, the singer and the writer of the song, co-writer, was I guess really good friends with David Letterman. Back when David Letterman was still had his show. And Letterman, when Warren Zevon, because he died, I think he had cancer or something like that. Because he died, he was only in his mid 50s when he died, and he died in 2003. I believe he had. Oh yeah, mesothelioma. That's what he had. So he did have cancer, and he died in the early 2000s. But while he was sort of, I guess, dying of this cancer, he was asked by David Letterman to come play on the Letterman show. And I think it was like in early 2003. I believe it was the year that he died. So just a few months before he dies, Letterman asked him to come play, I guess, a few songs or a set for his show. And one of the songs he played, I believe by Letterman's request, was Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner. And that was the last time he performed it ever, was on the Letterman show in 2000. I think it's 2003, because he died like right after that. So that's one fun fact. The other one is and I didn't know this, but apparently the screenwriter for Jurassic Park, The Lost World, like the sequel, there's the guy that's like the big game hunter in the show. His name's Roland Tembo. And apparently, according to the screenwriter, Roland is named after this guy, Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner, because the guy's nemesis in the movie is a guy named Van Owen.
Dude, that's awesome.
So, yeah, there you go. There's your fun fact for this song. So next time you watch the one of the least worst Jurassic Parks.
Yeah, Jurassic Park. If you listen to my other podcast, the Cold Bow podcast, it's
shout out.
Yeah. If you listen to that, you know it's one of my favorite movies, and I say movie, not series, because it immediately goes downhill after the first one. But
so Jurassic Park 3, just thoughts.
The one that just came out.
No, Jurassic Park 3. It's actually called Jurassic Park 3.
Oh, that's one with where it gets on the boat and comes to America or whatever, right?
No, that's the one where they there's like a rich couple or something, and they go back to like find their son who like got lost in Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
And the guy hallucinates while he's having a dream, and the raptor's talking to him.
Yeah. Oh yeah, in the yeah. Okay. It's been forever.
I always think of that scene because it's so stupid.
I remember it scared me as a kid. I specifically remember seeing that in the theater. That's the one where what's his face, the Chaos Theory guy, brings his black daughter, right?
I think so.
It doesn't matter.
I'm not sure. I saw that, and I remember thinking it was dumb when I saw it, but I'm a little bit older than you, so it wasn't as scary to me. I just thought this is kind of silly, but it's okay.
I was probably 8 or 10 or something like that.
Yeah. So anyway, sorry, just Jurassic Park thoughts. It's in the news, the new Jurassic Park movie.
It's vaguely relevant.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's wrap up. Don't want to keep you too long. Again, thanks, and to the listeners, we'll see you next time. And we will we'll leave you with the entire song. Hopefully, it doesn't get taken down or claimed. I don't know how it works. But here you go. You can listen to it.
Roland was a warrior from the land of the midnight sun, with a Thompson gun for hire, fighting to be done. The deal was made in Denmark on a dark and stormy day, so he set out for Biafra to join the bloody fray. Through 66 and 7, they fought the Congo War, with their fingers on their triggers, knee deep in gore. Days and nights they battled the Bantu to their knees. They killed to earn their living and to help out the Congolese. Roland the Thompson gunner, Roland the Thompson gunner. His comrades fought beside him, Van Owen and the rest. But of all the Thompson gunners, Roland was the best. So the CIA decided they wanted Roland dead. That son of a bitch Van Owen blew off Roland's head. Roland the Headless Thompson gunner, Norway's bravest sons up the score. They can still see his headless body stalking through the night in the muzzle flash of Roland's Thompson gun. In the muzzle flash of Roland's Thompson gun. Roland searched the continent for the man who done him in. He found him in Mombasa in a ballroom drinking gin. Roland aimed his Thompson gun, he didn't say a word, but he blew out Owen's body from there to Johannesburg. Roland the Headless Thompson gunner, Roland the Headless Thompson gunner, Roland the Headless Thompson gunner, talking about the man, Roland the Headless Thompson gunner. The eternal Thompson gunner, still wandering through the night. Now it's 10 years later, but it still keeps up the fight. In Ireland, in Lebanon, in Palestine, in Berkeley, Patty Hearst heard the burst of Roland's Thompson gun and body.
All right. That's the episode.
Cool.